The morning starts the same way. First the alarm clock rings, then the crunching of my spine as I get out of bed, and only then the realization of a new day. I, Heldis Waring, 68 years old, a widow, retired and former literature teacher, continue to live my life on a familiar schedule as if Alfred were still around. My home in Anderson is spacious enough for a single woman. It's 2 stories, with 4 bedrooms, and a garden that now requires almost no attention from me. The gardener comes twice a week. Tamsin insisted on it after my father died, and I didn't object. I didn't care at the time. I was used to eating breakfast alone, looking out the window at the maple tree Alfred and I had planted 30 years ago. The kitchen is the only place in the house where I still feel my husband's presence. It's where we spent mornings over coffee, discussing the day's plans, the news, or just silently enjoying each other's company. This morning, I was slowly stirring my oatmeal when my phone vibrated. A message from Tamsin. "Mom, Quentin and I will stop by around 4. We'll bring your meds. Don't forget to take your morning pills." I sighed, sending a short "okay" in response. My daughter had become surprisingly attentive over the past 2 years. She used to call once a week, come over for the holidays, and I thought that was normal. She has her own life, her own career as an accountant at Enders Corporation, her husband Quentin working as an investment advisor. But after I learned of my diagnosis, everything changed. Parkinson's disease is not a death sentence, especially in its early stages. A tremor in my right hand and some stiffness of movement were all the signs. The doctor assured me that with the right treatment, I could lead a normal life for many more years. But Tamsin took the news as if I had one foot in the grave. I shower, trying to ignore the handrails Quentin has installed in the bathroom. "For your safety, Heldis," he says, drilling into the wall. I don't need them, but it's easier to agree than argue. Then there's the daily ritual of the pills. They are arranged in small containers labeled morning, afternoon, evening. Tamsin supervises the medication intake like a strict nurse. "You might forget, Mom, and that's dangerous." After breakfast, I spend 2 hours reading in my office. I'm rereading Jane Eyre now, absorbing every word as I did 40 years ago, when I first discovered the book. Reading is the only part of my former life that illness cannot take away. At 11:30, I dress for my walk. Always at the same time, always along the same route, through Maplewood Park, past the library where I once worked, and back through the main square. 45 minutes at a leisurely pace. I do this even when it rains, sheltering under the umbrella Alfred bought me on our last anniversary. The sky is clear today, and the fall sun warms my face pleasantly. I stop by a park bench to take a break. A young mother with 2 children walks by, and I can't help but think of Tamsin. She never wanted children. Career is more important, she used to tell Alfred when he cautiously inquired about the possibility of becoming a grandfather. My husband never pressed my daughter, but I know that this desire he carried with him. Alfred died 5 years ago of a heart attack, suddenly, without warning. We had just returned from the theater, discussing a play. He laughed, grabbed his chest, and collapsed. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later, but it was too late. After his death, I fell into a daze. The months blended into a monotonous gray mass. Tamsin flew to the funeral, stayed for a week, and then went back to her life, leaving me with a list of psychologists and the number for a 24-hour bereavement support line. But then something changed. About 2 years ago, when the insurance company finally paid out and I decided to sell the stock Alfred was managing, Tamsin started calling more frequently. First every 3 days, then daily. She started coming every weekend, bringing groceries, checking on the house. Quentin showed up with her, always with tools, ready to fix things that weren't even broken. I get home in time for dinner. I make myself a simple salad and a turkey sandwich. I used to love experimenting in the kitchen, but lately it's easier to make something quick and familiar. Plus, Tamsin regularly brings in containers of food. So you don't have to cook, Mom. After lunch, I usually do crossword puzzles or play chess online. Alfred taught me how to play, and it has become our ritual throughout our 42 years of marriage. Now I play with strangers from all over the world. Not as enjoyable, but it helps keep my mind sharp. At 3 o'clock, I start getting ready for my daughter's arrival. I put the living room in order, although there's not much to clean. I rarely make a mess. I check the contents of the refrigerator so I know what to ask to bring in. Tamsin always asks if I need anything, and I try to have a ready answer. At 4:05, I hear the sound of a car pulling up. Tamsin is as punctual as a Swiss watch. She enters without knocking. She has a key and heads straight to the kitchen, where she leaves the grocery bags. "Mom, how are you today?" she asks, kissing me on the cheek. She smells of expensive perfume and business. "I'm fine, dear," I reply. As usual. Quentin follows her, carrying a small box of medicine. He's tall, always well-dressed, with thinning hair and a permanently tense expression. When Tamsin introduced him to me 8 years ago, I thought he was trying too hard to impress. That feeling remains. "Hello, Heldis," he says with a smile that never reaches his eyes. "How is your arm today? Has the trembling gotten worse?" I glance at my right hand absent-mindedly. "It's the same as usual, Quentin." "Thanks for asking. Tamsin is already putting out the groceries. I bought you some fresh fish. I'll cook it right now, freeze it in batches." "That's okay, honey. I can—" "Mom," she cuts me off in the tone she uses for her employees. "You need to eat right. It's important for your condition." I'm not arguing. It's easier to let her run the household than to listen to lectures about health and independence. While she cooks, Quentin checks my pills, noting something on his phone. "Dr. Bennett says we can try a new combination of drugs," he informs me. "I've set up an appointment for next week." "But I feel fine with the current medication," I object. "Preventive measures, Heldis?" He pats me on the shoulder. "It's better to get ahead of the disease than to catch up with it." I nod, though irritation builds inside. When and how did my health become their project? When did I stop making decisions about my own treatment? Tamsin bustles around the kitchen, talking about her work. Something about a new contract, about incompetent co-workers, about how she's appreciated at the company. Quentin inserts comments about her clients, about the market, about investment opportunities. They talk as if I understand the nuances of their careers, though I lost the thread in these stories long ago. "Mom, did you take your medication this morning?" Tamsin suddenly asks, interrupting her monologue. "Of course I did, dear, as I always do." She cast a glance at Quentin, who shrugs slightly. "Just checking," she says with a smile that seems strained. "You know how important it is to keep a regimen." I do. I hear it every day. While Tamsin finishes the fish, Quentin walks through the house, checking outlets, faucets, windows. Routine inspection, as he calls it. I sit in the chair, watching my life being inspected and adjusted without my active participation. "By the way, Mom," Tamsin returns to the living room, wiping his hands. "Quentin and I think you should consider a foster nurse, at least for half a day." "Why? I'm doing fine on my own. Right now, yes," she nods. "But it can get worse suddenly. It's better to be prepared beforehand. Besides, you'll have someone to talk to when we're not around." "I have books and a phone if I want to talk to someone." Tamsin sighs with that special patience that adult children have for stubborn parents. "Mom, we want you to be safe. What if you fall? What if you forget to take your medicine?" "I don't fall and forget," I say, trying to keep my voice firm. "Not falling and forgetting yet," Quentin corrects me gently. "But we have to look to the future. The future. They talk about it as if it's already mapped out, my progressive helplessness, their growing control. And I let it happen, agreeing to small concessions that add up to a larger dependency. I'll think about it, I say, knowing they'll come back to the subject. They always do come back. After dinner, which we eat together at the table, where Alfred once sat, Tamsin checks my bills. This has become another ritual. She goes through the statements, asking about every unusual expense, suggesting ways to save money. "Your pension won't last forever, Mom," she says often, even though we both know it's not about the pension. Alfred left me enough to live comfortably for the rest of my days. That's why I feel I've become my daughter's project, a project with financial gain. Before leaving, Tamsin leaves me food in the refrigerator, a medication schedule in a prominent place, and a promise to call tomorrow. Quentin says goodbye with a formal kiss on the cheek. "Take care of yourself, Heldis, and don't forget your medication." When the door closes behind them, I exhale. The house is mine again. I go back into the study, pick up the Jane Eyre I haven't read yet, and settle into a chair. It's dark outside the window, and I turn on the desk lamp, the same one Alfred gave me for our 30th wedding anniversary. Staring at the pages of the book, I think about today's visit, about how Tamsin and Quentin discussed my life as if it were a business plan, about how they talked about me in the third person, like I wasn't even here anymore, and about how I let it happen. I close the book without reading a line. There's something wrong with their care. Something changed when I received Alfred's inheritance. Or am I just becoming a suspicious old woman? The phone rings. It's Tamsin, checking to see if I remembered to take my evening pills. I assure her everything is fine, and she wishes me a good night. Her voice sounds strained, as if she's performing a duty rather than showing genuine concern. Before I go to bed, I pull a picture of Alfred out of my dresser drawer. He's smiling, standing by the lake where we spent every summer. "What would you do?" I ask the image, knowing there will be no answer. I lie in bed, turning off the light. In the darkness, it feels like my right hand is shaking harder. Or is it just my imagination? That hand once wrote poetry, guided a pointer through Shakespeare's lines, stroked little Tamsin's head. Now it treacherously trembles, a reminder of time moving inexorably forward. I close my eyes, preparing for another day on the schedule. The morning will begin as it always does. First the alarm clock, then the crunch of my spine, then the realization of a new day. But today, for the first time in a long time, I fall asleep with the uneasy feeling that there is something else lurking behind my daughter's mask of caring, and I need to find out what it is before it's too late. The first thing missing was Mom's brooch, a small silver rose with a pearl in the center. I discovered it missing when I was getting ready for the Anderson Literary Society's annual dinner. I checked all my jewelry boxes, rummaged through my dresser drawers, even looked under my bed, even though I'd last worn it at Christmas and remembered returning it to the velvet box. "Weird," I mumbled, going through the other jewelry. Very strange. The brooch had no material value, but it was precious as a memory. Mom had gotten it from her mother, and she had gotten it from her mother. 4 generations of women had worn it for special occasions. I was going to give it to Tamsin, though I doubted my daughter would appreciate the sentimental value of the jewelry. I called her, described the brooch, and asked if she had taken it to be cleaned or something similar. "Mom, why would I take your stuff without asking?" There was a slight irritation in Tamsin's voice. "Are you sure you didn't put it somewhere else? You forget things like that sometimes." "I don't forget," I countered, though uncertainty was creeping into my thoughts. "I always put it in the velvet box in the top drawer." "Keep looking," Tamsin said. "And if you don't find it, Quentin and I will come down this weekend and help." I declined their help, figuring I could do it on my own. Maybe the brooch really was in an unexpected place. But after a week of diligent searching, I was certain the jewelry had disappeared from the house. That was the first clue. The second was the missing papers. I always kept important papers in a metal box in my office: birth and marriage certificates, house deeds, insurance papers, wills. Every 6 months I checked on them, a habit instilled by Alfred, who believed in order in everything. On one such day, I discovered that a copy of my will was missing. The original was kept at the notary's office, but I had always kept a copy at home. Now it was gone. "Maybe you gave it to me for safekeeping," Tamsin suggested when I called. "After your diagnosis, we discussed centralizing documents, remember? I had no recollection of such a conversation. Moreover, I was sure I would never have agreed to such a thing. Alfred had taught me to control my finances and documents, and I prided myself on that independence. I'll check in my papers," Tamsin promised. "We probably have it." A day later, she emailed a picture of the document. "Found it in my place, just as I thought. I'll keep it for safekeeping, okay?" Without waiting for my response, she simply took control of my will. And that was just the beginning. Tamsin started coming over more often, sometimes unannounced. She checked the contents of the refrigerator, the cabinets, the medicine cabinet. One day I caught her rummaging through my clothes closet. "I was just seeing if you needed anything new," she explained with a strained smile. Quentin often accompanied her, and these days I felt watched. He wandered around the house with tools, checking faucets and outlets, but I noticed his gaze sliding over the bookshelves, the dresser, even the canvas I'd recently started painting. "I didn't know you were into painting, Heldis," he said one day, looking at my unfinished landscape. "I've started taking art classes for the elderly," I replied. "Tuesdays and Thursdays." Something flashed in his eyes. Surprise? Displeasure? But he smiled quickly. "It's a great class. Stimulates brain activity. It's good for your condition." That evening, Tamsin called to express concern. "Mom, are you sure you can handle this class? Going twice a week, sitting for hours with a paintbrush. It can be exhausting." "I'm 68, not 98, I retorted, "and Dr. Bennett recommended keeping active." "Of course, but—" "Tamsin," I rarely interrupted my daughter, but now I felt the need to set a boundary. "I can decide what activities I can do. Drawing relaxes me." She was silent for a moment, then changed her tone. "You're right, Mom. I'm sorry. I'm just worried." After that conversation, I watched my daughter and son-in-law's actions even more closely. I noticed Quentin taking pictures of documents on his phone when he thought I couldn't see. The way Tamsin checks drawers while I make tea in the kitchen. The way they exchange glances when I mention future plans or expenses. One morning while checking my book collection, I discovered that the first edition of The Great Gatsby that Alfred had given me for our 20th anniversary was gone. That book was worth several $1,000s, not a fortune, but a significant amount, and it had great sentimental value to me. I didn't call Tamsin. Instead, I waited for her visit over the weekend and mentioned the book's absence, as if by the way. "Are you sure that's where it was?" Tamsin asked, not even trying to help me look for it. "I'm absolutely sure. Alfred signed it, remember? To my Daisy, with love forever." "That's odd," Quentin shrugged. "Maybe you lent it to someone?" "I never lent that book to anyone," I replied firmly. It was always on the second shelf, next to To Kill a Mockingbird. Tamsin and Quentin looked at each other quickly, but I noticed it. "Mom," Tamsin said softly, "you do realize that forgetfulness is one of the symptoms of your condition, right? Dr. Bennett warned about it." "Dr. Bennett was talking about possible cognitive changes in the future?" I objected. "I don't have any." I remember all the details of my life, including the location of a valuable book in my own library. But they were already exchanging understanding glances, as if my protest only confirmed their suspicions about my deteriorating condition. That evening, after they left, I sat in my study for a long time, staring at the empty space on the shelf. What was going on? Am I really losing my memory? Or I didn't want to even think about the alternative, but the suspicion had already taken root. The next day, I went to the art class with the firm intention of consulting someone. I couldn't discuss it with my neighbors. Too close to home, too great a risk that the information would reach Tamsin. But there were people on the course from outside, older like me, perhaps with similar experiences. There was an atmosphere of quiet creativity in the studio. 10 or 12 people, all over 60, stood in front of easels trying to capture a still life of fruit and an antique jug. The teacher, a young woman named Leela, went from one student to the next, offering advice and encouragement. I took my usual seat and began my work, but my thoughts were far away. I was machine mixing the colors, making the apples too red, the shadows too deep. "Interesting interpretation," came a voice to my right, a little grim but expressive. I looked up and saw a woman in her 70s with short gray hair and penetrating blue eyes. She was new. I hadn't seen her in previous classes. Excuse me. "You're painting." The woman nodded at my canvas. "There's a sense of unease in it. Something bothering you?" I wanted to reply with a polite phrase, to get away with generalities, but instead I said, unexpectedly to myself, "I think my relatives are up to something." The woman looked at me carefully, then set her easel next to mine. "My name is Audrey Holloway, and I worked as a family law attorney for 35 years before I retired. Believe me, I've heard worse stories than yours." There was something about her direct gaze that lent credibility. I introduced myself and, lowering my voice, spoke briefly about the missing items, about Tamsin and Quentin's strange behavior, about their increased interest in my finances. Audrey listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally and continuing to draw. When I finished, she put the brush away and said, "Heldis, I don't want to scare you, but what you are describing sounds like a classic case of financial abuse of an elderly person." "You think my own daughter?" "I'm not saying that's exactly true," Audrey interrupted gently. "But let's look at the facts. Valuables disappear. Documents accidentally end up in your daughter's possession. They control your medications and try to limit your independence. What does your intuition say?" I sighed. That something is wrong, but I can't believe that Tamsin— "Love clouds the judgment," Audrey nodded, "and we always want to think the best of our children. But sometimes— Look, let's not jump to conclusions. We need to gather more information first." "How?" Audrey looked thoughtfully at her painting. "You could install hidden cameras, but that's a last resort. Start small. Keep a diary of all the oddities. Take dated photos of valuables. Write down the serial numbers of electronics if you have them. And most importantly, check to see if they've changed your medications. Changed their meds?" That thought never crossed my mind. "You said they control your medications. If they do have, nefarious intentions, that's a possible vector." I felt a chill run down my spine. "But that would be a crime?" "Yes." Audrey squeezed my hand. "I'm not saying they're doing it, but it's worth checking. Do you have access to your own recipes?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Tamsin takes all the paperwork from the doctor. She says it's safer that way." Audrey pressed her lips together. "Okay, here's what we'll do. After class, we could have coffee and discuss strategy. If you don't mind my interference, of course." "I don't mind," I replied gratefully. "In fact, I would really appreciate the help." The rest of the class was a blur. I moved my brush mechanically, but my mind was preoccupied with Audrey's words. Could Tamsin really? No, I couldn't even formulate that thought. After class, Audrey and I went to the little cafe across the street. Over a cup of espresso, for her, and green tea, for me, she helped me formulate a plan of action. First, Audrey began, pulling out a small notepad and pen. We need to check your current will. Do you remember what it says? Of course, I nodded. Everything is divided between Tamsin and several charitable organizations that Alfred supported. And the house? Does that go to Tamsin too? Yes, but with the stipulation that 20% of the sale goes to the scholarship fund of the university where I taught. And this will was made 5 years ago, after Alfred died. Audrey wrote something down in her notebook. Okay, you'll need to get a copy of this document directly from the notary. Tell them you lost yours and you want to make sure it's okay. Don't tell Tamsin about it. I nodded, feeling a bit of a traitor. Hiding something from my own daughter didn't seem right. Next, Audrey continued, the medications. You said they bring you the drugs already packaged in containers? Yes, Tamsin puts them out a week in advance. You need to save a few pills from different days and take them to the lab for analysis. Will the lab agree to do that without a doctor's prescription? Audrey smiled. There are private labs that do that kind of thing. It will cost money, but the results will be worth it. We continued to make a list of things to do. Check bank statements for the last year. Set a password on the computer. Take pictures of any remaining valuables. Buy a small safe for important documents. And most importantly, Audrey said, finishing her espresso, don't show that anything has changed. Act as you always have. Let them think they're in control. And if I find out that they're really... I couldn't finish the sentence. Audrey covered my hand with hers. Then we'll decide what to do next. One step at a time, Heldis. One step at a time. We exchanged phone numbers, and Audrey suggested we call each other every day. Just to check in, she said. It felt like a conspiracy, but I felt oddly relieved that I was no longer alone with my suspicions. Returning home, I reflected on the conversation. Maybe I was exaggerating. Maybe Tamsin was really just concerned for my well-being, and the missing items were the result of my forgetfulness. But deep down inside, I knew something was wrong, and now I was determined to find out what it was. At home, the first thing I did was check the medicine containers. The little white pills looked the same as usual, but now I eyed them with suspicion. I set 2 of them aside and stashed them in an old lollipop box that Tamsin never opened. Then I checked the jewelry box, took a picture of each piece of jewelry on her phone, wrote down the approximate cost and sentimental value. A pearl necklace from Alfred, gold earrings from her parents for her 18th birthday, a watch engraved, "Forever Yours," the little treasures of a lifetime. In the evening, Tamsin called. She talked about work, about weekend plans. Then, as if by the way, she asked, "How's the art class going, Mom? Not too tiring?" "Not at all," I said, trying to keep my voice normal. "I met a new member today. She's a very nice woman, a former lawyer." "A lawyer?" Tamsin sounded wary. "Interesting. What did you 2 talk about?" "Painting, of course," I lied, feeling a prick of conscience. "Technique, colors. You know how fascinating it can be." Tamsin laughed, a little strained. I thought, "Of course, Mom. I'm glad you like it. Quentin and I will stop by tomorrow and get groceries and medicine." "I'll be waiting," I said with a smile in my voice that I didn't feel. After the conversation, I sat for a long time, looking out the window at the darkening garden. The trees Alfred had planted cast long shadows on the lawn. This house had once been filled with love and trust. Now it was a battlefield, and I didn't know exactly what or who I was fighting against. I pulled out an old photograph, Tamsin at age 5, laughing, with 2 front teeth knocked out sitting on Alfred's lap. My little girl, my daughter. Could she really have wished me harm? That night I slept badly, waking at the slightest noise. In the morning, looking at my reflection in the mirror, tired eyes, new wrinkles, gray hair, I made a decision. I will find out the truth, no matter what it takes. I will not allow myself to be victimized, not by the disease, not by my own daughter. With that thought in mind, I began preparations for Tamsin and Quentin's visit. Today, I will watch them especially closely, and with Audrey's help, I will solve this disturbing mystery before it is too late. The week after my conversation with Audrey turned into a carefully planned reconnaissance operation. I had developed a special caution. I kept my phone to myself, took notes in the ciphers Alfred had taught me when I was young, and watched Tamsin and Quentin's every move in my house. When they arrived, I pretended to be more distracted and tired than I really was, letting them think the control was entirely in their hands, while I myself assembled a mosaic of little details of their behavior. Quentin was checking my email when he thought I was in the kitchen. Tamsin was taking pictures of the pages of my checkbook while I showered. On Wednesday, I got my first lab results back. Audrey had helped me find a place where I could check the composition of the pills anonymously for cash. The message from the lab tech was brief and disturbing. The pills contained the usual levodopa in a lower dosage than they should, plus an admixture of benzodiazepines. Benzodiazepines? I asked Audrey on the phone. Is that a sedative? Worse, Audrey's voice sounded strained. In combination with levodopa and in high doses, they can cause drowsiness, confusion, and breathing problems. Heldis, someone is making a helpless vegetable out of you. I sat up, feeling the room spinning slightly around me. But why? If they want me dead? Maybe not death, Audrey interrupted. Think about it logically. If you just die suddenly, there could be questions, an investigation. But if you gradually become incapacitated, if everyone sees you deteriorating from your illness, if eventually you are placed in a nursing home where you quietly fade away, it seems natural, and all the while they control your assets. Her words shook me to the core. I always thought my relationship with Tamsin was complicated but loving. Yes, she could be cold, calculating, but poisoning her own mother? I can't believe it, I whispered. I understand, Audrey sounded sympathetic, but the facts speak for themselves. We need more evidence to understand the full picture. On Thursday, I decided to act more decisively. When Tamsin and Quentin arrived with another load of medication and groceries, I discreetly turned on the recorder on my phone and left it in the living room when I went to get some rest. I actually went up the stairs, then quietly returned and stood frozen in the hallway, listening to their conversation. At first, they talked about mundane things, bills, roof repairs on their own house, vacation plans. Then Quentin lowered his voice. Did you notice a change in the last 2 weeks? She seems more detached. Yes, Tamsin replied. The new dosage is working. Dr. Reed was right. Dr. Reed? My doctor is Dr. Bennett. How much longer does he think? Quentin asked. There was a pause. I held my breath against the wall. He says at this rate, she could be completely incapacitated in 3 or 4 months. Might need institutionalization by the end of the year. Great. Quentin's voice sounded satisfied. The house is almost ours. I've already contacted the appraisers, unofficially, of course. Wait with your plans, Tamsin interrupted him with irritation. She's not that bad yet, and I'm worried about her starting to make new friends. That woman from the art class. Who cares? Quentin snorted. Everyone can see that she's getting weaker. Her hand is trembling more. She's mixing up her words. If someone suspects something wrong, we can always point out the progression of the disease. The house is almost ours, Tamsin. She'll be dead soon, and we'll finally be out of debt. I felt the room shake. My throat was dry. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like they should have heard it pounding. She's going to die soon. My own daughter and son-in-law planned my death with a coolness I couldn't fathom. Don't say that, Tamsin said, but without real judgment in her voice. She is my mother, after all. A mother who always favored her students over you, Quentin parried. How many times have you complained to me about growing up with babysitters while she taught her precious literature? It doesn't matter now. Tamsin's voice sounded strained. I'm just saying we have to be careful. You're in too much of a hurry. In a hurry? Quentin's voice sounded angry. We've got creditors on our tail, Tamsin. I've already mortgaged everything I can. If we don't pay them in the next 6 months, we lose everything, and your mother is sitting on a fortune that could solve all our problems. I know, Tamsin replied tiredly. Just do it carefully, and don't discuss it here. The walls have ears. The irony of her last words hit me like a slap in the face. I slowly, silently climbed back up the stairs, went into the bedroom, and closed the door. Then I sank down on the bed, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. My own child, my own flesh and blood. The girl I'd rocked at night, the one I'd read stories to, the one I'd given everything I could. Now she's methodically poisoned me for money. I don't know how long I sat there staring into the void. There was a knock at the door, and Tamsin's voice said, "Mom, are you awake? We're leaving, but we left dinner in the fridge. And don't forget to take your evening pills." Evening pills? The same ones that were slowly killing me. "Thank you, dear," I replied, surprised at how calm my voice sounded. "I'll be right down to say goodbye." I forced myself to smile as I hugged them on the doorstep, thanked them for their concern, waved as they drove away. And then I went back into the house, shaking with shock and disgust. The first thing I did was flush down the toilet all the pills they'd left behind. Then I called Audrey. "I was right," I said when she answered. "They are slowly poisoning me. I heard them talking. They're waiting for me to die so they can get the house." "Oh, Heldis," Audrey's voice was full of sympathy. "I'm so sorry. Did you record the conversation?" "Yeah, on my phone. They were talking about some Dr. Reed who's helping them, and that I'm supposed to be totally incapacitated in a few months. This is a serious offense," Audrey said. "We should go to the police," I wondered. The police, the charges, the trial, my daughter in handcuffs, headlines in the papers. "Woman tried to poison mother for inheritance." Nausea comes to my throat. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this," I admitted. "Heldis, they're trying to kill you," Audrey reminded me. "Slowly but surely. I know," I whispered. "But she's still my daughter. I can't just send her to prison. Then what do you want to do?" I stared out the window at the garden Alfred and I had spent decades creating, at the house where I planned to spend the rest of my days, the life my own daughter and son-in-law were trying to take from me. "I want to teach them a lesson," I said slowly, one they would never forget. I spent the night sleepless, pacing the house that had suddenly become a battlefield. Every picture of Tamsin on the walls, every reminder of our past seemed like a mockery now. At 3 a.m, I took them all down and put them away in a box in the basement. By dawn, I had a plan formed. Not just defense, revenge. They wanted my house and my money. Well, they wouldn't get a dime. But first, I had to gather all the evidence. In the morning, I called Dr. Bennett's office and made an emergency appointment. His secretary seemed surprised. "Mrs. Waring, your daughter usually handles your appointments. I have decided to take matters into my own hands," I replied firmly. At the doctor's office, I didn't beat around the bush. "Dr. Bennett, have you prescribed me any benzodiazepines?" He raised his eyebrows in surprise. "No, of course not. With your Parkinson's, that would be counterproductive. Do you know Dr. Reed?" Dr. Bennett frowned. "Frederick Reed. He specializes in palliative care. As far as I know, he's in private practice. Why do you ask? I took a deep breath and told him everything. About the switch, about the conversation I'd overheard, about the gradual deterioration of my condition, which I now realized was not caused by illness, but by deliberate poisoning. Dr. Bennett listened with increasing horror. Mrs. Waring, these are extremely serious allegations. Do you have proof? I showed him the results of the pill analysis and the tape of the conversation. As he listened, his face turned pale. I have to report this to the authorities, he said. It's a criminal offense. I know, I replied. But before you do that, I need your help. By lunchtime, I had a detailed report of my actual medical condition. Stable, with minimal symptoms, the right medication in the right dosage, and Dr. Bennett's promise to remain silent for a few more days until I put my plan into action. The next stop was the office of my notary, Mr. Phelps, an elderly gentleman who had handled our family's affairs while Alfred was still alive. Mrs. Waring, what a pleasant surprise, he said, inviting me into his office. What can I do for you? I need to check my current will, I said, and maybe make some changes. Mr. Phelps pulled out a file folder. Sure. The latest version is dated 5 years ago, after Mr. Waring's death. According to it, the primary beneficiary is your daughter Tamsin, with a few charitable donations. May I see the document? When I looked through the paperwork, I noticed a few oddities. The percentage of charities was smaller than I remembered, and some of the wording seemed unfamiliar. It's not exactly what I remembered, I said cautiously. What do you mean? Mr. Phelps looked puzzled. Could I check to see if there were any later versions? He dug into the computer and frowned. That's odd. The system notes that a new version was compiled about a year ago, but it's not in the physical files. Who requested the changes? On the record? Dash. He glanced at the screen again. Your daughter, Miss Tamsin Edgecombe. She said she was acting on your behalf under a power of attorney. I felt the world around me start to wobble again. I never had a power of attorney in her name. Mr. Phelps's face stretched. Mrs. Waring, I'm afraid there may be a case of fraud here. I'll have to make an internal investigation. I understand, I said. In the meantime, I'd like to make a new will. Today. And make a legally binding medical directive. Of course, he opened his notebook. What would your wishes be? By evening, I felt exhausted but satisfied. A new will had been drafted, a medical directive had been executed, and an advance fraud suit had been filed, all without Tamsin's knowledge. I returned home and called Audrey. You were right, I said without saying hello. They forged the power of attorney and tried to change the will. Jesus, she exhaled. This is getting worse. Heldis, you have to go to the police. I will, I promised. But first I want to make sure they don't get anything. Not the house, not the money, nothing. And how do you plan to do that? I'm not entirely sure yet, I admitted. But it's a start. A new will has been drawn up. Now I need to protect myself from their further attempts at manipulation. Stay with me, Audrey suggested. At least for a few days until we have a full plan. I thought about it. Leaving the house would mean admitting defeat. No, I'd stay and fight. Thank you, but I'll stay here. This is my home. I won't let them force me out of it. Then I'll come to you, Audrey said firmly. Tonight. Don't argue. You shouldn't be alone after everything you've learned. I didn't mind. Having someone I could trust seemed like a blessing now. Audrey arrived in the evening with a small bag and a bottle of good scotch. I figured this would help with the shock, she said, pulling out the bottle. Well, and help with the brainstorming. We sat in my office, drinking the scotch in small sips and working out a plan of action. I showed her all the evidence I'd collected, the results of the pills, the tapes of the conversations, the suspicious documents. You've got enough to bring them to justice, Audrey said, looking through the materials. But if you want more than just legal retribution, I want them to feel the same sense of betrayal I felt, I said, surprised at my own harshness. I want them to realize that they've lost not only their money, but their right to be called family. Audrey nodded understandingly. Then we need to develop a strategy that will hit the most painful points. What is most important to them? Money, I answered without hesitation. Quentin is in debt, and Tamsin has always been obsessed with material possessions. The house was their main goal. It's worth about $1 million in its current condition. Okay, Audrey made a note in her notebook. What else? Reputation? Pride? I wondered. Tamsin has always cared about what others think. She's built an image of a successful, caring daughter. And Quentin, he's concerned about his position. He wants to appear to be a successful investor, when in fact he's constantly losing money. Good, Audrey nodded. Now we have goals: money, reputation, pride. We'll hit all three. We talked into the night, working out a plan that at first I thought was too bold, even cruel. But the more I thought about what they were trying to do to me, not just steal money, but take my life, slowly and painfully, the more certain I became that they deserved every drop of bitterness I was going to give them. Don't think you're being too harsh, Audrey said, as if reading my mind. They were planning a murder, Heldis, the slow, brutal murder of their own mother. If it hadn't been for your vigilance, you'd be in a nursing home, drugged to the point of unconsciousness while they sold off your possessions. She was right. It wasn't revenge in the full sense of the word. It was justice and protection. By dawn, the plan was ready. Detailed, multi-step, taking into account all of Tamsin and Quentin's possible reactions. I'd make a note of them at the next visit when they came to change my meds. Then, with proof in hand, I'll move on to the next phase. Audrey stayed the night in the guest room, and it was strangely comforting to know there was someone I could trust in the house. For the first time in months, I felt like the control of my life was back in my hands. I stood at the window, looking out at the rising sun coloring the Anderson sky, with pinks and golds. Somewhere out there, in another house, my daughter and son-in-law were planning my death. They didn't know their plans had been uncovered. They didn't know that instead of a helpless victim, they were confronted by a woman determined not only to survive, but to bring justice. They don't yet know what Heldis Waring is capable of, I thought with a grim smile, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a surge of energy and clarity of thought that I hadn't felt since I'd lost Alfred. Yes, I was 68 years old. Yes, I had Parkinson's. But I wasn't done living, and I was going to teach those who thought otherwise a lesson. The morning was surprisingly clear for mid-October. The sun was pouring into the kitchen, where Audrey and I were drinking coffee and finalizing our plan. On the table was a notebook with a neat list of things to do today, the first item on it being, meet the lawyer 10:30. Are you sure you want to go alone? Audrey asked, glancing at her watch. I could come with you. I shook my head. I need to do this on my own, especially since Lawrence Pierce has been our family's lawyer for years. I trust him. Okay, Audrey nodded. Then I'll look for a private investigator. I have a couple of reliable people from my old practice. I finished my coffee and stood up, feeling oddly light. After a night of sleeplessness and shock, I expected to feel defeated, but instead I felt a surge of energy and determination. Lawrence Pierce's office was located in an old mansion in downtown Anderson, a 20-minute drive from my house. I'd chosen a cab instead of my car. After overhearing my conversation with Tamsin, I didn't want to take any chances, even though I felt fine. Lawrence met me at the door of his office. Tall, with a neat gray beard and attentive eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses, he was the epitome of what a solid family lawyer should look like. Heldis, he shook my hand warmly. It's good to see you. Come in, please. His office hadn't changed since Alfred and I had come here to draw up our joint will 30 years ago. The same oak paneling, bookcases filled with legal volumes, and a massive desk on which now stood a modern computer, the only concession to time. So, Lawrence said as we settled into the leather chairs, your call sounded pretty insistent. What can I do to help? I took a deep breath and began the story. The missing items, Tamsin and Quentin's strange behavior, the medication switch, the overheard conversation. With each word, Lawrence's face grew more and more grim. These are very serious allegations, Heldis, he said when I finished. Do you have proof? I pulled a folder of documents out of my bag, the results of the pill analysis, the audio recording of the conversation, pictures of the missing items with their approximate value, records of the strange changes in my bank accounts that Audrey and I had discovered last night. Lawrence methodically went through all the materials, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When he reached the audio recording, his face grew rigid. This is outrageous, he said, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. And completely illegal. Heldis, we must go to the police immediately. I know, I nodded, and I will. But first I need to protect myself and my assets. I want to change the will completely. Of course, Lawrence nodded. That's your right. What changes would you like to make? I want to disinherit Tamsin completely, I said firmly. I want the house and most of the estate to go to the Foundation for Literary Education at Anderson College, where I taught. Some of the money will go to scholarships for students from low-income families. Lawrence nodded, making notes. That's a sensible decision. What about personal effects, jewelry? I wondered. Some jewelry had been family heirlooms, passed down the female line, but now the chain would be broken. The jewelry could be sold and the money added to the scholarship fund, books to the college library, furniture. I don't know, maybe to charitable organizations. Are you sure you want to eliminate Tamsin completely? Lawrence asked cautiously. I understand how you feel, but this is your only daughter. Who tried to kill me? I said stiffly. No, Lawrence, I'm not leaving her anything. In fact, I want to add a special clause. If Tamsin or Quentin try to contest the will, I want all evidence of their actions made public and turned over to the prosecutor's office. Lawrence raised his eyebrows. This is an unusual measure. But yes, we can include such a clause. We worked out the details of the new will over the next hour. I also executed a medical power of attorney for Audrey Holloway so that Tamsin and Quentin could not make decisions about my medical treatment. Lawrence then helped me draft letters to the banks instructing them to freeze transfers of large sums without my personal presence. That should protect your finances in the short term, he said. But for full protection, I would recommend setting up an irrevocable trust. That means the assets will be legally separate from you, although you will retain the right to use them during your lifetime. That sounds reasonable, I agreed. How quickly can we do it? For the basic structure, a few days. For a complete transfer of all the assets, it will take longer, but we can start the process immediately. By the time we finished, it was past noon. Lawrence walked me to the door, holding a folder of documents for the new will. We'll have everything ready for tomorrow, he said. Come by 2 o'clock for the signing. And Heldis, take care of yourself. If you need anything, any time of the day or night, call me. Thank you, Lawrence. I shook his hand firmly. I knew I could count on you. As I left the office, I felt hungry. No wonder I'd barely eaten for the last 24 hours, living on coffee and adrenaline. Across the street, I spotted a small bakery with an attractive storefront. Priestley and Son, read the sign above the door. The bell jingled melodiously as I entered. The scent of freshly baked bread and cinnamon hit my nose. The bakery was small but cozy. A few tables, a wooden counter with baked goods under glass, and shelves of bread on the wall. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with kind eyes and gray hair gathered in a neat ponytail. "Good afternoon," he said with a smile. "What can I do for you?" "Yeah, I'm not sure," I admitted, looking at the variety of baked goods. Everything looked so appetizing. "Then let me recommend." He leaned over the counter. "The almond croissants are particularly good today. And if you want something more substantial, we have a quiche with mushrooms and spinach." I ordered both, with a cup of tea. The man nimbly packed the pastries and prepared the tea. "Have a seat," he said, pointing to the tables. "I'll bring your order." I chose a table by the window and watched the man, apparently priestly himself, move behind the counter. I could feel the polish of years of practice in his movements. Soon he brought my order on a tray. "Here you go," he said, placing the tray on the table. "Enjoy your meal." I thanked him, and he was about to leave when I suddenly asked, "Where is the son from Priestley and Son?" The man turned around and smiled with a slight sadness. "In Chicago. Decided to become a chef in a fancy restaurant instead of the family bakery. Can't blame him. Young people need big cities. But you kept the name. Hope springs last." He shrugged. "Maybe someday it'll come back. Until then, I'm on my own. I'm Noel Priestley, by the way." "Heldis Waring," I introduced myself. "Are you new to the neighborhood?" Noel asked. "I don't remember seeing you before." "No, I've lived in Anderson for 40 years. I just don't usually come to this part of town." 40 years? Then I'm the new guy," he laughed. "Moved here 15 years ago from Portland." New customers entered the bakery, and Noel excused himself to serve them. I took up my meal, watching him out of the corner of my eye. There was something soothing about the way he worked. Methodical, with a smile for each customer, with obvious pleasure in his work. The quiche was delicious, with a crispy crust and juicy filling. The croissant melted in my mouth, leaving an almond aftertaste. I didn't realize how hungry I was until I had eaten every last crumb. Noel returned to my table as the flow of customers subsided. "How did you like it?" "Excellent," I replied sincerely. "Best pastries I've had in a long time." "Glad to hear it," he smiled. "Would you like dessert? It's on the house." I wanted to say no calories, cholesterol, and all. But then I thought, why not? After everything that had happened, I deserved a little joy. "I'd love to," I said. "What do you recommend?" "Lemon cream tartlets, fresh out of the oven," he said proudly. "My grandmother's secret recipe." Soon he returned with a small tartlet decorated with a thin slice of lemon. The dessert was the perfect combination of sweet and sour, with a touch of vanilla. "It's delicious," I said, taking a sip of tea. "Your grandmother was a brilliant pastry chef." "She was my inspiration," Noel nodded, taking a seat at my table. The bakery was empty again, and he allowed himself a brief pause. "What do you do, if it's no secret?" "I'm a former literature professor at Anderson College," I replied. "Retired now. Literature." His eyes lit up. "I'm a big fan of the classics, especially Dickens." "You are?" I was pleasantly surprised. "And what is your favorite work?" "Our mutual friend," he answered without hesitation. "An underrated piece." We plunged into a conversation about literature, and I was surprised to find that Noel was a well-read and insightful conversationalist. He talked about books with the same passion with which he must have created his baked goods. The time passed quickly, and I looked at my watch and realized, oh my God, it's almost 3 o'clock. "I have to go." "Come again," Noel said as I paid for my lunch. "I'm happy to have new regulars, especially those who can keep up a conversation about Dickens." "I will," I promised, surprised at how easy that sounded. Just yesterday, the thought of making new acquaintances had seemed far away, but today was different. today was different. As I left the bakery, I called Audrey. "How's the detective search going?" "I found the perfect candidate," she said. "Malcolm Reed, ex-cop, specializes in family cases. He can meet with us tonight." "Where are you now?" I told him about my meeting with Lawrence and the surprise lunch at the bakery. "Priestley and Son?" Audrey interjected. "I know the place. Is the owner a handsome, gray-haired gentleman?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Noel Priestley. We had a nice talk." Audrey said with a smile. "Not a bad choice, Heldis." "It was just a conversation," I countered, feeling myself blush. "Nothing more." Sure. Audrey was clearly enjoying herself. "So, you're going home? I'll be there in an hour with our detective." At home, the first thing I did was check my phone. 3 missed calls from Tamsin and a message. "Mom, you're not answering. Are you okay? We'll pick you up tonight." I replied briefly, "I'm fine. Been busy. No need to come over tonight. I have guests." A few seconds later, the phone rang. Tamsin. "What kind of guests?" she asked without greeting. "You didn't say you were expecting someone." "A friend from art class," I answered calmly. "We're discussing a project. Mom, are you sure it's a good idea? You've looked tired lately, and guests can be tiring." "I feel fine, Tamsin," I said firmly. "In fact, better than I have in months." There was a pause. Then Tamsin said with ill-concealed irritation, "Good, but I'll still come back tomorrow to check on your meds. You don't forget to take them, do you?" "Of course not, dear," I lied. "See you tomorrow." I hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of anger and bitterness. How easily she'd used caring as a tool of control. How cleverly she'd manipulated my feelings. But it wouldn't work anymore. Audrey arrived exactly an hour later, and with her was a sturdily built middle-aged man with attentive eyes and close-cropped hair. "Heldis, meet Malcolm Reed," she introduced him. "The best private investigator in the state." "Mrs. Holloway exaggerates," Malcolm said with a slight smile, shaking my hand. "But I'm really good at what I do." We settled into my office, and I repeated the story for Malcolm, showing the same evidence I'd shown Lawrence that morning. The detective listened attentively, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. "So," he said when I finished, "if I understand correctly, you need further evidence of your daughter and son-in-law's actions for possible prosecution?" "Yes," I confirmed, "and a defense against their further attempts." Malcolm nodded. "I can help with both points. First, we need to set up surveillance on their home and places of work. Check their finances. By legal means, of course. Find this Dr. Reed and find out what his role is. And I'd recommend installing hidden cameras here in the house." "Cameras?" I frowned. "Is that legal?" "In your own home? Absolutely." Malcolm nodded. "Small, discreet, with the data transmitted to a secure server. That way we can document any of their activities here." "That makes sense," Audrey agreed, "especially since they keep coming in and changing your meds." I hesitated. Installing cameras felt like such an intrusive. But then I remembered their conversation, their plans for me, and the hesitation faded. "Okay," I said. "When can you install them?" "Tomorrow while you're away," Malcolm answered. "Mrs. Holloway said you have a painting class?" "Yes, from 11 to 1 o'clock. "That's fine. I'll be there at 11:30, and I'll be finished by the time you get back. I'll also start gathering information about your daughter and son-in-law's financial situation. From what I overheard, they're in serious debt, and that may be a clue to their motives." We discussed the details: where to set up the cameras, what areas should be monitored, how I would access the recordings. Malcolm proved to be a seasoned professional, anticipating all the details. "As for payment," he began. "Don't worry about that," I interrupted. "Whatever it costs, I can afford it, and it's worth it for my safety." After Malcolm left, Audrey and I sat down at the kitchen table. She made tea and I pulled out cookies, not as good as Noel's baked goods, but they do. "You've done a lot of work in one day," Audrey said, pouring the tea into cups. "A new will, a detective, even a new acquaintance. All thanks to you." I squeezed her hand. "I don't know what I would have done without your support." "It's nothing," she dismissed me. "You're stronger than you think. Now, tell me more about this baker. Is he single?" I couldn't help laughing. "Audrey, I'm 68 years old, and I have Parkinson's disease. I'm hardly the type for romantic adventures." "Nonsense," she waved her hand. 68 is the new 48, and Parkinson's, with the right treatment, won't stop you from enjoying life. So he's single?" "A widower," I admitted. "His wife died years ago. He has a son, but he lives in Chicago." "See?" Audrey said triumphantly. "Fate. You're both single, both intelligent, both love literature. I think it's a sign. A sign that you're an incorrigible romantic." I shook my head, but without irritation. There was something refreshing about Audrey's optimism, her faith in new beginnings, even at our age. We spent the evening working out a plan for tomorrow. Tamsin was coming over, and we needed to be ready. I didn't have to show that anything had changed. To continue to play the role of the slightly oblivious mother, letting her daughter take care of herself. "You'll get through this," Audrey said confidently. "Just think of it as a part in a play. You only have to hold out for a few days until we gather enough evidence." "And then what?" I asked. "Then you'll be free," she answered simply. "Free to live your life the way you want, without fear or manipulation." "Isn't that what you want?" I wondered. Not so long ago, my desires had been limited to living quietly in this house, reading books, and making occasional visits to the library or the store. But now, after everything that had happened, I could feel an appetite for life that I had thought had long since faded. "I want more," I admitted. "I want to feel like I'm really living. I don't just exist." "Then you'll have this." Audrey raised her cup in a toast of sorts. "To your new life, Heldis Waring." We clinked cups, and I felt real hope for the first time in a long time. In the evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I pulled an old photo box out of the closet. I looked through the pictures from different years. Alfred and I on our wedding day, little Tamsin taking her first steps, the whole family at the beach. Faces, smiles, moments that will never come back. I stopped at the photo of Tamsin in her graduation gown, with a serious expression on her face that contrasted so much with the joyful mood of the event. She had always been a serious child. Too serious, maybe. When did she begin to see me not as a mother, but as an obstacle? When did love turn into calculation? I found no answers in these pictures, only more questions and a nagging ache in my heart. But amidst the bitterness, there was now determination. I will protect myself. I will survive, and maybe even start a new chapter. Folder of papers. The house is no longer legally yours, although you retain all rights of occupancy and use. After my meeting with Lawrence, I went to the barber shop. It was a spontaneous idea from the day before. If I was starting a new life, why not start with a new haircut? 2 hours later, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. My hair was cut short into a stylish bob with soft waves, and the silver-gray color was enlivened with light golden strands. I looked younger, more energetic, more confident. My next stop was a clothing store. I decided to update my closet, to get rid of the shapeless cardigans and baggy skirts I had been wearing for the past few years. With the help of a patient consultant, I picked out a few elegant pantsuits, a pair of jeans, some bright blouses, and even a dress for special occasions. When I returned home with the shopping bags, I found Audrey in the kitchen preparing dinner. "Oh my God," she exclaimed when she saw me. "You look amazing. What happened to your hair?" "I decided it was time for a change," I smiled, running my hand through it. "Do you like it? Do you like it?" "I love it." Audrey walked around me, looking at me from every angle. "You look 15 years younger. And what's in the bags?" I showed her my purchases, and she approved of every item, especially the blue dress. "Perfect for a date," she winked. "What date?" I was embarrassed, feeling myself blush. "With our baker friend, of course," Audrey grinned. "Don't tell me you haven't thought about him." I couldn't deny it. Thoughts of Noel Priestley did cross my mind more often than I was willing to admit. His kindness, his intelligence, his love of literature, all of it appealed to me. But after 40 years of marriage to Alfred and 5 years of widowhood, the very thought of a new relationship seemed strange. "I'm not sure," I began. "Heldis Waring," Audrey said sternly, crossing her arms over her chest. "You're 68, not 108. You're a beautiful, intelligent, interesting woman, and you deserve to be happy after all you've been through. So tomorrow we're going to the bakery, and you're going to take him out for a cup of coffee. Or I'll do it for you." I laughed, giving up. Okay, I'll think about it. But right now, we have more important things to do." The next morning, I decided to take Audrey's advice and went to Priestley & Son Bakery. I wore one of my new outfits, a dark green pantsuit, which Audrey assured me was a perfect match for my eye color. Noel was just putting fresh croissants in the window when I walked in. He looked up and froze for a moment, not recognizing me with my new haircut. "Heldis?" he finally said. "Is that you? You look amazing." "Thank you," I smiled, feeling strangely excited. I decided to change my image a little. It's definitely for the better. He smiled back, and I could see the wrinkles gathering around his eyes, the sign of someone who smiled a lot. "What can I treat you to tonight?" "I was hoping to try that apple pie you told me about last time," I said. "If it's still available, of course." "Always for you." Noel pulled a round pie with a perfect golden crust from under the glass display case. "Have a seat, and I'll get you a slice and some tea." We talked for almost an hour, going from topic to topic, from books to music, from travel to philosophy. Noel turned out to be a very interesting conversationalist with a broad outlook and a subtle sense of humor. I couldn't remember the last time I had spoken so freely and easily with a man. When it was time to leave, I summoned up all my courage. "Noel, I was thinking, maybe you'd like to have dinner sometime. At a real restaurant, not a bakery." His eyes widened in surprise, and then he smiled broadly. "I'd love to, Heldis. I have Sunday off. If you're free." "Sunday is perfect." I smiled, feeling my heart beat a little faster than usual. We exchanged phone numbers, and Noel walked me to the door. "See you Sunday," he said, shaking my hand lightly. "See you Sunday," I echoed. Coming home, I felt strangely light, as if I'd lifted an invisible weight off my shoulders. At 68, I had a date. Alfred would be pleased, I thought. He always said he wanted me to be happy if anything happened to him. At home, Audrey greeted me eagerly. "Well, how'd it go?" "I have a date on Sunday," I announced, not hiding my smile. "I knew it," she exclaimed triumphantly. "I have an unmistakable instinct for such things. Where will you go?" "We haven't decided yet." I hung my coat in the closet. "But I have time to think about it. In the meantime, what's the latest from Malcolm?" Audrey's face turned serious. He called. "There's something important. Tamsin and Quentin met with Dr. Reed last night. Malcolm couldn't overhear the conversation, but he took some pictures. And judging by the facial expressions, the conversation was intense." I nodded, feeling the cheerful mood from my meeting with Noel give way to anxiety. They're getting ready for something. We need to accelerate our plan. Over the next few days, we completed the final preparations. I met with the leadership of the Literary Education Foundation to discuss the details of the house transfer. I updated the medical records, drawing up a formal order to keep certain doctors, including Dr. Reed, from making decisions about my treatment. Malcolm installed additional cameras and a panic button system linked directly to the police. On Saturday, we had a final rehearsal of the deterioration of the condition. I had to look bad enough for Tamsin and Quentin to believe their plan was working, but not bad enough for them to insist on hospitalization. On Sunday morning, Tamsin called to let me know that she and Quentin would stop by in the afternoon to check on me. I agreed, feigning weakness in my voice, and then called Noel back to reschedule our date for the evening. I stood at the window, watching the first guests pull up to the house. The sun was shining brightly, as if nature approved of my plans. Today was the day of truth, the day when the masks would be torn off and the truth would come out. "Nervous?" Audrey asked, approaching me with a cup of tea. "Strangely, no," I answered, accepting the cup. "I feel relieved, like I was finally letting go of a heavy weight." I was dressed in a new navy blue suit, hair styled, makeup light but noticeable. No sign of deteriorating. Today, I wanted to look strong and confident. Last night's date with Noel had gone great. We had dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant, talking about books, music, travel. He told me about his plans to expand his bakery. I shared my dreams of traveling to Europe. At the end of the evening, he walked me home and, saying goodbye, kissed me gently on the cheek. It was an innocent gesture, but it made my heart flutter like it had when I was young. "They're here," Audrey said, looking up the driveway. Tamsin and Quentin's car pulled up in front of the house. It's time for the show to begin. I took a deep breath and headed for the door. Tamsin looked worried as she entered the house. Her anxiety only increased when she saw me, trim, elegant, and clear-eyed. "Mom?" She sounded perplexed. You look good." "Thank you, dear," I smiled. "Today really is a good day." Quentin looked around the living room, noticing the changes. New pictures on the walls, none with Tamsin, fresh flowers, a bottle of champagne and an ice bucket on the table. "What's going on, Heldis?" he asked, trying to keep his tone friendly. "Your call sounded disturbing. You were talking about important news." "I did," I nodded. "But let's wait for the others." "The others?" Tamsin tensed. "Who did you invite?" At that moment, the doorbell rang. Audrey let Lawrence Pierce and Dr. Bennett in. A few minutes later, Malcolm Reed arrived, followed by, to my surprise, Noel Priestley. "I hope you don't mind," he whispered as I met him at the door. "Audrey called, said you might need some support." I squeezed his hand gratefully. Noel's presence really did give me strength. When everyone was gathered in the living room, Tamsin looked confused. "Mom, what's going on? Why are all these people here?" "Sit down, Tamsin." I pointed to the couch. "You too, Quentin. I have a really important announcement to make." They reluctantly complied.